Hi, good morning. So, having the same issue. Try this one. There we go. So the title for my talk was Appetite for Destruction. And to be honest with you, I was kind of half expecting like Guns N' Roses to be blaring when I walked on stage. So there's just a touch of disappointment there. You know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about and really touch upon is this misconception that cybersecurity is about things like ransomware and malware, and my personal favorite, O-Day attacks. Actually, the reality is that when we read and when we see particular stories related to these types of threats and these types of issues occurring, actually, it's the impact which for me is more important. Now, of course, this was taken from the WannaCry attacks, and in fact, it was a comment that was left on the BBC website. But I want to give you my own personal perspective, because at the particular time of WannaCry, actually it was a Saturday morning, and WannaCry, of course, broke on Friday. And I was actually at a hospital, just actually not too far from here, because we've got a family friend that's currently in hospital. And I remember at the time, my phone was actually going crazy. I was getting about 400 messages an hour. And my daughter turned to me, and she's 11, and she says, "Dad, I can't wait to the time I get 400 messages an hour." And I kind of said, "I can't wait to go back to 1 message an hour, which is what you're getting." But what happened there was they actually switched the internet off in the hospital, which actually was a precaution that was taken. And this family member, who was really in good spirits, within about 3 to 4 days of not having a connection out to the internet, well, what happened was their mood actually changed dramatically. And when he went in for a procedure on Thursday, he'd actually completely changed from being really positive to not. And I know that's a really, really small example, but that's the reality of what we work in, because these types of issues have a very real impact. I mean, just this year alone, there's been more data records that have been leaked in 2017 than all of 2016 so far, 1.9 billion. I want you to think about that number, right? We look at big numbers and we go, wow, okay, that doesn't mean anything to me. You know, Gareth Bale's weekly wage, it's so big we can't really put it into context, but 1.9 billion people have had their data leaked, and we don't know the impact that that's going to have. So we began to look at these types of issues, and we really wanted to understand, well, okay, what are we actually dealing with? I mean, we look at the impact, but the other thing that we now have to deal with is really the motivation behind certain attacks. You know, it used to be simple. Months and months ago, I remember we did some analysis on the attacks in Saudi Arabia. And what we realized was actually that was what we call a wiping campaign. It was meant for destruction. But what WannaCry showed us was that now we're seeing things like ransomware, which traditionally was out to make money, or actually more than just making money, but we believe were actually a campaign meant for disruption. Now, everybody here probably saw and heard about the stories about WannaCry being really badly written. We all thought it was mistakes done by the criminals, but we actually did a great deal of analysis, and it was 28 pages of analysis that we did on WannaCry. And what we determined was this was a campaign that was actually fairly well written. In fact, they actually followed really good data governance, because straight after it occurred, we did everything we can to see if there's a fix. You know, did they make a mistake? Because if it was so badly written, there'd be a mistake, right? But there wasn't. In fact, they sanitized everything. And they made one mistake, though. This was a mistake which did not allow them to be able to automate the decryption of computers. So in other words, if I encrypted your computer and you pay me the money, they couldn't tell that you paid the money. That doesn't seem right, does it? I mean, if you've done a ransomware campaign intended to make money, surely the first thing you'll fix is your payment mechanism. I mean, like, to me, that's like 101. So we began to ask questions, which was, and actually it was only after 2 weeks that we began to really ask the question, which was WannaCry ransomware, or actually was it meant to disrupt? And actually that's a really important point, because was WannaCry successful? If it was ransomware, no. I mean, it made $150,000, which is not a lot. In the grand scheme of things, by the way, it's a lot of money. But CryptoWall, for example, made $325 million. and actually infected the same number of computers. And these guys made 100,000. So we began to really determine whether we're seeing the rise of this thing called pseudo-ransomware. And actually, with NotPetya, was fairly straightforward. Almost within hours of this particular attack occurring, we were straight onto it, and we said, you know what, we think this is another pseudo-ransomware sample. So you've often heard of this term called attribution roulette, right? There are 4 countries in the world that do all cybercrime. Right. We know that's not true, right? But now we're dealing with this concept of motivation roulette. It used to be simple. We knew the country that was targeting you, because it was always that one country in Southeast Asia, and we knew what they were going to go after you for. Right? It's kind of tongue-in-cheek. Now, it's going to be a lot more difficult. I mean, it took us 2 weeks, and we still haven't absolutely confirmed what the motivation behind WannaCry is. We believe it was disruption or possibly proof of concept. And I think part of the reason why it's such an attractive proposition was, this was taken about 12 months ago, and I'll just explain what we have here. Christine is actually a researcher, and a researcher is pretending to be a victim of ransomware. And she's actually in a chat forum. So, by the way, cybercrime is the only crime that you actually have a help desk. It's fantastic. You've even got SLAs, by the way, which is remarkable. But she's in conversations with this individual, and she asks the question, and she says, well, why is the ransom so cheap? Like, why are you charging so little? And the ransomware operator makes the claim that actually they've been paid by a Fortune 500 company to disrupt the competition using ransomware. Now just think about that for a second. Does that sound incredible? Because to me, it makes perfect business sense. If you want to go out and disrupt your competition, you can do so. And you can use ransomware as an example, or actually, as we saw, you can use DDoS, distributed denial of service. And this was just taken a few weeks back, because America's Card Room, which is a poker room, were actually holding a competition one weekend. And as a result of a series of attacks that occurred against them, they had to cancel all of their tournaments. They had to refund all of their players. And when the CEO of America Poker Room went back to the criminal and said, why are you doing this? Why don't you get a real job? His response was, this is my job. Somebody else is paying me to attack you. Like, the game has changed now. And now the ability to be able to go out and disrupt your competition can be done for less than the price of a cup of coffee. I mean, if I wanted to do a DDoS attack against you, or if Wired wanted to go after their competition, for $3, they can take them down for an hour. Greg's taking notes, by the way. Paul, you're in the room, right? Keep an eye on that. But that's what we're dealing with. So what can we do? And you know, Ian talks a lot about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Look, that's not fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's the reality. But what can we do to stop this? And I wanted to share with you an initiative that we've launched. Actually, we as an industry have launched, meant to put a line in the sand. Now, everybody's seen Lord of the Rings, right? It's a tech audience, so it's an assumption, a fairly safe assumption. And it was that scene in Lord of the Rings where they're leaving the mines of Mordor, and if you remember, they're crossing the bridge, and Gandalf puts his staff down and says, you shall not pass, right? It's a pivotal scene. Well, this is kind of that line in the sand moment. We kind of said enough is enough. And on the 25th of July, 2016, ourselves, Kaspersky Lab, EC3, and the Dutch National High-Tech Crime Unit, supported by AWS and Barracuda, launched an initiative where we called No More Ransom. Now, has anybody heard of No More Ransom? Great. 2 people. Glad to know our work hasn't been wasted. But what we said was there has to be somewhere where you can go if you've been hit by ransomware. And so what we did was we created a repository which provides advice and preventative information about how to prevent ransomware. Right, no big deal. There's about 1,000 websites like that. But what we also did was we provided a tool called Crypto Sheriff. And we will tell you what form of ransomware you've been hit by. So there's so many families out there. Last January 2016, we had 27 families of ransomware. Now we've got, it's in the 4 figures, 5 figures now. So we will tell you what form of ransomware you've been hit by, but here's the really cool part. We will also give you free tools to decrypt your data. Now, This is remarkable because for the first time, you actually have a third option. You know, historically, if you've been infected by these types of attacks, you have two choices: pay criminals or lose your data. Now, let me ask you a question. Most people here have probably received a phone call from a friend or family. I've got a virus on my computer and I can't access the photos. What's your advice? Like, genuinely, what do you tell them? Do you tell them to go and pay criminals? Or do you say, I'm sorry, forget the memories, it's gone? And remember, what WannaCry and NotPetya have taught us is they don't necessarily give their data back. In fact, we actually captured a lot of chatter in criminal forums where a lot of the ransomware operators were angry about WannaCry because it sends a message which says if you pay, you don't get your data back. So we've actually given a third option. Now, when we launched on the 25th of July, we had 7 tools, and in the space of 12 months, the official figure is we've prevented £9 million going into the hands of criminals. I usually get a round of applause when we say that. I'm just saying. So that's £9 million that haven't gone into the hands of criminals, that hasn't gone back into redevelopment of more ransomware, that effectively is being kept away from criminal hands. And I'm really, really proud of that. And you know, the number of partners that we now have include the National Crime Agency in the United Kingdom to Interpol. Actually, we've got over 100 partners all across the world with over 30 law enforcement agencies. And we're actually working together. And here's the really remarkable part. We don't charge a penny for this. We don't capture your IP address. We don't even ask you for your email address. It's just completely free of charge, put out there to try to put a stop, or at least slow down these types of attacks. And of course, it hasn't gone unnoticed by the criminals. I did a presentation in Vegas last year at reInvent for the AWS conference. And I asked AWS, actually it was remarkable, I asked AWS to host this particular site for me, and I said, I need you to host a site. And they said, well, you don't need to phone us, we're a cloud provider, right? You can just, you can do on-demand self-service. And I said, no, but I need to have it for free. And they went, right. And I said, probably it's going to be one of the most targeted websites in the world. And they agreed, which no idea why. But the site has been targeted so much. This is actually a list of the top IPs that have generated errors in a 16-hour window. That particular individual at the top was 615,449 security attacks against the website in 16 hours. So we began to look into this, and we said, okay, let's try to find the people that are going after this particular site. Now, that IP address there, 193.150, was the #1 biggest culprit. What I realized was it was actually a VPN service, and it was actually 3 miles from my house. So if anybody of you know my wife, please don't tell her that, because she's going to ask to move, and she's got very high demands about what we're going to do. But that's the reality of what we deal with. We've actually impacted the profit that's being made by criminal gangs. And not only are they trying to bring the website down, but actually, I'm pretty proud to say, they've actually created a ransomware family named after us. I'm pretty proud of that. So the Queen gets a boat named after her. We actually get ransomware named after us. I know what I'd rather have. So when you get infected with ransomware, what it has is that it actually has an extension at the end of the file. So if it's normally, you know, myphoto.jpg, it's myphoto. For WannaCry, it's WCRY, or for Locky, it's .locky. Well, in this particular instance, if you're infected by ransomware, it actually ends up with .no more ransom. Now, why we're doing this and why this is important. I love this photo, by the way. And I'm sure many of you have seen this photo on LinkedIn. You know, you see predictions from experts saying, hey, look, the world that we live in, you know, insulin pumps having vulnerabilities or cardiac equipment having vulnerabilities. But these types of devices that we rely upon have more code than what we used to, than the older operating systems we used to live with. I mean, last year at Black Hat, myself and the team, we actually showed how we can insert ransomware into cars over the air. It's what we call an IVI, an in-vehicle infotainment system. and we were able to install ransomware on these particular systems. Now, we went to the manufacturer and we said, excuse me, there's a vulnerability in your systems and this impacts cars. In other words, if you have this particular system and this exploit gets out, people can literally hold cars to ransom. And do you know their response? It was absolute silence. That's over 14 months that we initially made them aware of the vulnerability, and they've had absolute silence on this. So we need to make a stand on this, because quite frankly, that's our future unless we do something about it. And what that shows me, well, actually teaches me two things. Number one, if you live next to me or any of my researchers, don't lend us your car. Like, I genuinely mean this. We actually used my neighbor's car for the research, and he still has no idea at all. So that's number one. But number two, we need to do something about this, because quite frankly, this is the future that we have before us. You know, I did a TV show with Horizon on WannaCry, and they phoned me up and they said, look, Raj, can you come in and show us how simple it is to do a ransomware campaign? And I said, look, I'm busy. Can I send my 11-year-old daughter? And they thought I was joking. And yet, every single person here in this room knows that an 11-year-old can buy stolen credit cards, stolen medical data. She can even hire a hitman. That's the world we live in. And quite frankly, unless we do something about it as an industry and as a society, that's our future. Thank you.